When my son David told me he hoped I would starve to death after he stole the $4.7 million from my deceased wife's inheritance. He didn't know I had the original documents in my safe, proving he had forged his mother's signature. What he did next was so cruel that I decided to erase him from my life forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to William's Revenge Stories. Turn on notifications because we have new stories every day. Leave a like, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. My name is Alan Miller. I'm 68 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew my son David. For 42 years, I thought I had raised an honorable, hard-working man who respected the values his mother Emily and I had taught him. I was so wrong. It all started on Tuesday, March 15th, 2024, exactly 8 months after the funeral of my dear wife Emily. That day, which changed my life forever, David arrived at my house in Chicago, in our upscale neighborhood, with a smile I now recognize as a predator's. "Dad, we need to talk about Mom's inheritance," he said, sitting on the sofa where Emily used to read her romance novels. His words sounded strangely formal, almost rehearsed. I should have realized it then. David pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the coffee table. "I've been reviewing all the papers with my lawyer, and it turns out Mom left everything clear in her will. The lake house, the company shares, and the $4.7 million in the savings accounts. It's all in my name." The world stopped for a moment. Emily and I had talked about our wills many times. She was always very clear. She wanted me to inherit everything, and after I passed, David would receive the inheritance. It was a logical decision, considering I was older and would need the resources for my final years. "David, that can't be right," I said, feeling a strange chill run down my spine. "Your mother and I agreed that I would inherit her assets, and you would receive them after I passed." David's expression changed instantly. The mask of the concerned son disappeared, revealing something that chilled my blood. "Dad, don't get confused in your old age. Here are the official documents, signed by Mom and certified by the notary. Michael Johnson. Everything is in order." I took the documents with trembling hands. Indeed, there was Emily's signature, apparently authentic, leaving her entire fortune directly to David. But something didn't fit. I knew my wife's handwriting like the back of my hand after 45 years of marriage, and although the signature looked like hers, there was something different. "I need time to process this," I muttered, feeling the room spin around me. "There's nothing to process. Dad, I've already started all the legal procedures. The money is already being transferred to my account. The lake house, too." David stood up, smoothing his shirt with an arrogance I had never seen in him before. "Consider this an advance on your inheritance. It all would have been for me eventually anyway. It was then that I said something that would change our relationship forever. David, if this is real, I will respect your mother's wishes. But if I find out there is anything irregular in these documents, the consequences will be severe." My son laughed, a cold, calculating laugh that pierced me like a dagger. "Consequences? From an old man who can't even remember where he put his car keys? Dad, accept reality. Mom was smarter than you, and she knew I would take better care of her money. Your mother loved me, David. She would never have done something like this without consulting me. Did you love her?" David moved closer to me, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own son, because if you really loved her, you would respect her final wishes instead of questioning her decision. That night, after David left with a triumphant smile, I sat in the study I had shared with Emily for so many years. Her photographs looked at me from every corner, and I could almost hear her sweet voice telling me, "Alan, something is not right." Over the next few days, David began to make dramatic changes to his lifestyle. Suddenly, he had a new BMW 7 Series. He had rented a luxury apartment downtown, and he posted photos on social media of dinners at the most expensive restaurants in the city. Every time I saw it, a piece of my heart broke a little more. Not because of the money, but because I was discovering who my son really was. On Friday, April 8th, 3 weeks after that life-changing conversation, David came to visit me again. This time he didn't come just to inform me, he came to humiliate me. "Dad, I've been thinking about your situation," he said, examining the family photographs as if they were merchandise in a thrift store. "I think you should consider moving to a place more appropriate for your age and your new economic circumstances. This is my house. David, I lived here with your mother. All our memories are here. Memories don't pay the bills. Dad, and considering that you now depend solely on your pension," David paused dramatically, savoring every word he was about to say. "Well, let's just say, maintaining this large house is going to be complicated." It was in that moment that something inside me broke. Not the sadness I had felt for weeks, but a cold, calculated anger that I had never experienced before. "You know what, David?" I said, rising slowly from my armchair. "Your mother would be so proud to see what you've become." My sarcasm seemed to amuse him. "Oh, I'm sure she would be, after all. She was the one who decided to leave me everything." "Yes," I replied, looking him directly in the eye. "I'm sure that's exactly what she would have wanted." That night, while David celebrated his inheritance in some downtown nightclub, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. I went to my study and opened the safe that Emily and I had installed years ago. Inside, carefully organized and protected, were all our most important documents. Property titles, original wills, insurance policies, and marriage and birth certificates. I took Emily's original will, dated and signed just 6 months before her death, and compared it to the documents David had shown me. The difference was subtle, but undeniable to someone who had seen Emily's signature thousands of times. The slant of certain letters, the pressure of the pen, small details that only a husband of 45 years would notice. David had forged his dead mother's signature to steal my inheritance. At that moment, with the irrefutable proof in my hands, I knew the war had begun, and my son had no idea what was coming. For the next 3 days, I immersed myself in a meticulous investigation that would have impressed even Emily, who always admired my capacity for detail. I spread all the documents on the dining room table, David's forged will on one side, the original papers on the other. The difference was devastating once you knew what to look for. In the authentic will that Emily had signed on September 22nd, 2023, just 2 months before her pancreatic cancer diagnosis, her handwriting showed its usual firmness. The E in Emily had its characteristic rightward slant, and the M in Miller ended with that little flourish she had developed since she was young, in David's forgery. Those details had been imitated, but not perfectly. The pen pressure was inconsistent, as if someone had slowly traced each letter, trying to copy a model. Even more revealing, Emily always dated her important documents by writing out the full month, September, never abbreviated. The fake document said Sept 2023. But the most conclusive evidence came when I checked the bank records I kept in my personal filing cabinet. Emily had died on November 14th, 2023. The supposed will David had shown me was dated December 5th, 2023. My son had forged a document dated 3 weeks after his mother's death. That revelation hit me like a hammer. He hadn't just forged the signature, he had invented an impossible date, counting on my grief to prevent me from checking the details. For 42 years, I had underestimated my own son's capacity for manipulation. On Saturday, April 11th, while David posted photos of his new Rolex Submariner on Instagram, I began to reconstruct the timeline of his plan. I reviewed every conversation we'd had during the last months of Emily's life, every hospital visit, every moment he had been alone with the family documents. I vividly remembered the day Emily slipped into a coma. November 8th. David had insisted on staying at the hospital that night while I rested at home. "Dad, you've been here 5 days straight. Go home, take a shower, eat something hot. I'll stay with Mom." At first, I thought it was filial consideration. Now I understood it had been opportunism. That night, probably while his mother was dying. David had photographed all our important documents. He had access to our signatures, our seals, our complete banking information. On Tuesday, April 14th, exactly 1 month after his first triumphant visit, David returned home. This time, he came with an even more arrogant attitude. He walked around the house as if he already owned it, evaluating furniture, looking at art pieces Emily and I had collected over decades. "Dad, I've been thinking about the future of this property," he said, while examining the grand piano Emily played on Sunday mornings. "Obviously, keeping a 4,000 square foot house for one person is a waste of resources. This house has sentimental value. David, sentimental value doesn't generate income." He sat on the piano bench and played a few discordant keys. "I've spoken with some real estate agents. In the current market, we could get at least $800,000 for this property." "We could?" "Well, I could. Technically, according to Mom's will. I am the sole heir of the family." David closed the piano lid with more force than necessary. "But I'm generous, Dad. I'm willing to share the profits with you. Let's say $100,000 for your retirement. It's more than many people your age have." During that conversation, I maintained superhuman control. Every fiber of my being wanted to confront him immediately, show him the real documents, expose him for the thief he was. But 45 years of building a company from scratch had taught me the value of strategic patience. "It's an interesting proposal," I replied calmly. "Let me think about it." "There isn't much to think about. Dad, the numbers are clear." David got up and walked to the window overlooking the garden where Emily grew her roses. "Besides, at your age, living alone in such a big house is dangerous. A fall, a heart problem, and you could be there for days without anyone noticing." His words sounded like a veiled threat. He wasn't just calculating my money, but my physical vulnerability. That night, after he left, I called the notary, Michael Johnson, who had handled our legal affairs for over 20 years. Michael had known Emily since before our marriage. His father had been the Miller family notary for decades. "Alan, good to hear from you," Michael said, with that warm voice that always reassured me. "How are you holding up since Emily?" "Michael, I need to ask you a very specific question about Emily's will." There was a brief pause. "Of course. Is there a problem with the documentation?" "David has shown me a will where Emily supposedly leaves her entire inheritance directly to him, dated December 2023. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice a mixture of confusion and concern. "Alan, that's impossible. The last will Emily signed in my office was in September 2023. And in that document, you are the sole beneficiary of all her assets." Emily was very specific on that point. "Are you absolutely sure I have the originals in my safe?" Along with the video recordings of the signing, Emily insisted everything be documented exhaustively due to her diagnosis. She wanted to make sure there were no legal ambiguities after her death. That confirmation was the final nail in the coffin of my relationship with David. He hadn't just forged documents. He had invented a completely fictitious will, knowing I was emotionally vulnerable from losing Emily. Over the next few days, I continued my investigation with the methodicalness of a detective. I reviewed David's bank statements from the last 6 months, documents I had access to because I had co-signed for his first apartment years ago. The financial patterns revealed the planning of his deceit. In November, immediately after Emily's death, David had contacted several law firms specializing in probate law. In December, he had made payments to a document specialist whose name I recognized from some scandals in the newspapers. In January 2024, David had begun liquidating small investments of his own, as if preparing for a large influx of money. In February, he had consulted with financial advisors on how to handle a significant upcoming inheritance. Everything had been premeditated, calculated, executed with a coldness that I found impossible to associate with the boy I had raised, the young man I had comforted when he broke his leg at 12, the man who had cried in my arms the day Emily received her diagnosis. On Sunday, April 20th, as I organized all the evidence into separate folders. I received a call that almost gave me a heart attack. "Dad?" David's voice sounded distorted, probably from alcohol. "I need you to know something important." "What is it?" "David, I'm at the downtown casino, and I just lost $120,000 in a single night." My heart stopped. "What did you say?" "Calm down. Dad, I have over $4 million. $120,000 is pocket change." His laugh sounded hysterical, uncontrolled. "You know the best part? I'm playing with the money Mom left me. She always said to be careful with money. But now that it's mine, I can do whatever I want. David, please, come home. We can talk about this." "Talk about what?" "About how Mom preferred me over you? About how she finally recognized who was more capable of managing the family fortune?" His voice turned cruel, venomous. "Dad, accept reality. I was always smarter than you, and Mom knew it." He hung up before I could answer. That night, as I listened to the rain hit the windows of the home I had shared with Emily, I made the final decision. David hadn't just stolen his dead mother's money. He was destroying it in a spiral of self-destruction that would have broken Emily's heart. It was time for my son to learn the consequences of underestimating his father. Monday, April 21st, dawned with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. After weeks of pain and uncertainty, I finally had a clear purpose: to legally prove that my son had committed a series of serious crimes against his mother's memory and against me. At 9 in the morning sharp, I dialed the number of James Bryant, a lawyer specializing in criminal and civil law whom I had met years ago during a business dispute. James had a reputation for being relentless when it came to document fraud, and his experience with similar cases made him the perfect person for my situation. "James, I need your professional help on a very delicate matter," I explained after the pleasantries. "It involves will forgery, financial fraud, and inheritance theft." "Alan, those are very serious charges. Are you completely sure of what you're telling me?" "I have incontrovertible physical evidence." "We can meet today." 2 hours later, I was sitting in James's office in the financial district, surrounded by shelves full of legal codes and judicial precedents. I had brought all the documents, organized in meticulously labeled folders: originals, forgeries, bank records, and the complete timeline of events. James examined each document with the concentration of a surgeon. His expression grew more serious with each page he reviewed. When he reached the comparison between Emily's authentic signatures and the forged ones, he whistled softly. "This is a textbook case of aggravated document forgery," he murmured, using a magnifying glass to examine the details. "The difference in stroke pressure is evident even without professional forensic analysis. What are our legal options?" "Multiple fronts of attack." James leaned back in his chair and began to list them on his fingers. "Forgery of a public document, which carries between 6 months and 3 years in prison. Aggravated fraud, due to the kinship and the amount, which could mean 1 to 6 years. Identity theft, by passing himself off as the legitimate heir and recovering the money. That's the interesting part. Since the funds were obtained through fraudulent documents, any bank transfer based on those documents is legally void. We can request an immediate freeze on all accounts where that money has been deposited." My heart began to beat faster. After weeks of feeling powerless, I finally saw a path to justice. "We will need an official handwriting expert," James continued. "I know the best forensic expert in the country for this type of analysis. His name is Edward Vance, and he has testified in high-profile cases for the last 15 years. How long will the whole process take? To get the precautionary freeze measures, I can file the lawsuit tomorrow morning. The Chicago courts are efficient in cases of family financial fraud. As for the handwriting analysis, Edward can have preliminary results in 72 hours. That afternoon, while James prepared the legal documentation, I dedicated myself to a task I had been postponing: contacting all the banks where Emily and I had joint accounts to inform them of the fraudulent situation. The first call was to Main Street Bank, where Emily had kept her main account since she was 25. I spoke with the branch manager, Megan Lewis, who remembered Emily perfectly from her regular visits over the decades. Mr. Miller, I am deeply sorry for your loss, Megan said with genuine compassion. Emily was one of our most beloved clients. How can I help you, Megan? I need to report a fraud situation related to Emily's accounts. I have reason to believe that someone has used falsified documents to access her funds. Megan's tone immediately shifted to professional and alert. Mr. Miller, that is extremely serious. Can you come to the branch immediately? We need to document this complaint officially. At the bank branch, Megan reviewed all the movements in Emily's accounts since November. What we discovered was even worse than I had imagined. David hadn't just transferred the $4.7 million. He had used the forged documents to access an investment account I didn't know about, where Emily had kept another $800,000 in government bonds. Mr. Miller, according to our records. These transfers were made by presenting a power of attorney that supposedly granted David Miller full control over all of Mrs. Miller's accounts. Megan explained, printing the relevant documents. Can you immediately freeze any account where these funds have been deposited? Once we have the court order? Yes. But I can tell you that we have identified 3 different accounts where substantial deposits have been made in recent months. On Tuesday, April 22nd, Edward Vance, the forensic expert, arrived at my house to conduct the analysis. He was a meticulous man in his 50 seconds, with specialized magnifying glasses and a briefcase full of instruments that looked like something out of a detective movie. Mr. Miller, I've reviewed the documents your lawyer sent me, he said, setting up his equipment on my dining room table. Prima facie. There are obvious discrepancies between the authentic writing samples and the questioned documents. For the next 3 hours, Edward subjected each document to microscopic scrutiny. He used ultraviolet light to analyze the ink, measured the stroke pressure with specialized instruments, and compared each letter with authentic samples of Emily's writing that I had provided. The evidence is conclusive, he finally said. These signatures were made by someone attempting to imitate your wife's handwriting, but they lacked the muscle memory developed over decades of writing in a specific way. The differences are subtle to the untrained eye, but unmistakable for forensic analysis. How solid is this evidence in court? Inarguable. I have 30 years of experience testifying in similar cases, and I have rarely seen such obvious forgeries. Whoever did this gravely underestimated the sophistication of modern handwriting analysis. On Wednesday, April 23rd, James officially filed the criminal complaint against David at the Central Courthouse. The complaint included all the crimes we had identified, supported by the handwriting analysis, bank records, and witness statements. That same afternoon, I received a call that filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. Mr. Miller, this is Judge Catherine Hayes from Instructional Court Number 12. We have reviewed your complaint and the evidence presented. Given the gravity of the charges and the strength of the preliminary evidence, we are proceeding with immediate precautionary measures. What does that mean? Exactly? It means that tomorrow morning, we will proceed with the preventive seizure of all bank accounts where the fraudulently obtained funds have been deposited. All assets acquired with that money will also be frozen. That night, as I prepared dinner in the kitchen where Emily used to experiment with new recipes, I felt for the first time in months that I was honoring her memory correctly. I would not allow her memory to be stained by the greed and betrayal of our own son. On Thursday, April 24th, at 8 inches the morning, court agents showed up simultaneously at 3 locations. The luxury apartment David had rented, the BMW dealership where his new vehicle was parked, and the offices of Main Street Bank where he held his main accounts. I did not witness any of these procedures directly, but James kept me informed minute by minute through phone calls. Alan, the precautionary measures have been executed without problems, he informed me at 10 a.m. All of David's accounts have been frozen. The BMW has been impounded, and his landlord has been notified that the deposit and payments for the apartment were made with funds of fraudulent origin. And David? Does he know what's happening? Not yet. The agents didn't have to contact him directly. He'll find out when he tries to access his accounts or use his credit cards. I spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation. I knew that at any moment, David would discover that his world, built on lies and forged documents, was collapsing. And when that happened, I would finally know the true personality of the man I had raised for 42 years. The wait was about to end, and justice was finally beginning to move, with the relentless precision that Emily had always admired in the legal system. Friday, April 25th, began my silent operation to methodically dismantle the life of luxury David had built with his mother's stolen money. While he slept, probably hungover from another night of squandering at the downtown casinos, I was already executing the first phase of my plan. At 7 a.m., I contacted the upscale leasing agency that managed the luxury apartment David had rented in a high-rise. I spoke directly with the owner, Robert Stone, a businessman who had inherited several buildings downtown. "Mr. Stone, my name is Alan Miller. I am the father of the tenant, David Miller, in apartment 312 of your building." "Ah, yes. I know your son. A very elegant young man. How can I help you? I'm afraid I must inform you that my son has been paying the rent with fraudulently obtained funds. I have a court order here certifying that all the money used for the deposit and monthly payments comes from an account funded by falsified documents." The silence on the other end of the line was long. Robert was an experienced businessman who immediately understood the legal implications of what I was explaining. "Mr. Miller, this is very serious. What do you need me to do? The lease agreement must be terminated immediately due to the illicit origin of the payments. Under state law, any contract financed with money from criminal proceeds is null and void." 2 hours later, I received confirmation that David's contract had been canceled. He had been given 24 hours to vacate the apartment, and the $6,000 security deposit would be held as compensation for the legal inconveniences. My second call was to the BMW dealership on the main avenue, where David had bought his 7 Series for $58,000. The sales manager, Anthony Reed, remembered the transaction perfectly because David had paid in cash, something uncommon for vehicles of that price. "Mr. Reed, the payment my son made for that vehicle comes from fraudulent funds," I explained after introducing myself. "I have court documentation proving the money was obtained through forgery of testamentary documents. This is very complicated. Mr. Miller, the vehicle is already registered in your son's name. I understand the situation, but the law is clear. Any asset acquired with money of illicit origin can be seized and returned to the legitimate estate. My lawyer can send you the complete documentation if necessary." Anthony was cooperative once he understood the legal gravity of the matter. The BMW was impounded that same afternoon from the underground parking of David's building. When he tried to use it, he would discover it had been seized by court order. But my most strategic move of that day was contacting all the banks where David held accounts. Because I had been his financial guarantor for years, I had access to information about his main banking operations. My first call was to the City Trust Bank, where David had opened a premium account after receiving the inheritance. I spoke with the branch manager, Frank Cole, who knew my flawless credit history spanning decades. "Frank, I need to report a fraud situation that directly affects the accounts of my son, David Miller." "Alan, of course. What kind of fraud are we talking about?" "The funds my son has deposited into his account come from forged testamentary documents. I have a court order for the immediate freezing of any account funded with these resources." Frank reviewed the movements in David's account while we spoke on the phone. What he discovered left him speechless. "Alan, in the last 3 months, your son has moved more than $5 million through this branch. He has made transfers to accounts in Switzerland, bought certificates of deposit for huge amounts, and even invested in cryptocurrencies." "Cryptocurrencies?" "Yes. He bought Bitcoin and Ethereum for approximately $800,000. He has also made transfers to online casinos and high-risk investment platforms." This information hit me like a punch to the stomach. David hadn't just stolen his mother's money. He was squandering it in ways Emily would never have imagined. Every dollar spent on gambling and financial speculation was an additional insult to her memory. "Frank, I need you to immediately freeze all these operations. And I want a detailed report of every transaction made since November 2023. By 3 p.m., I received similar calls from Main Street Bank and others, confirming they had proceeded with freezing David's accounts. In total, They had immobilized $6.2 million, distributed across different financial products. But the most devastating blow I prepared for David that day was the cancellation of all the credit cards I had guaranteed for years. David had 4 premium cards with combined limits of $150,000, all backed by my personal assets. I contacted each issuing entity, explaining the legal situation and requesting the immediate cancellation of the cards due to fraudulent activity by the user. By 6 p.m., David had been left without access to any means of electronic payment. Saturday, April 26th, passed in an unsettling silence. David still hadn't tried to contact me, which suggested he hadn't yet discovered the magnitude of his situation. He had probably spent Friday night in some exclusive club, confident that his cards and accounts were still working normally. I dedicated that day to preparing the final phase of my strategy, the complete removal of David from all my wills and insurance policies. This required an exhaustive review of all documents where he appeared as a beneficiary. My main will, drafted in 2020, named David as the universal heir to all my assets after my death. He was also the beneficiary of my life insurance policy worth $900,000 and had rights to my company pension plan, accumulated over 40 years of work. I contacted my trusted notary, Patrick Sims, to schedule an urgent appointment for the following Monday. Patrick had known Emily for years and would perfectly understand my motivations for these drastic changes. On Sunday, April 27th, while attending Sunday service at St. James Cathedral, where Emily and I had been married, I reflected on what I had accomplished in just 3 days of silent work. David would soon discover that his luxury apartment lease was canceled. His BMW was impounded. His bank accounts were frozen, and his credit cards were canceled. More importantly, he would find out that all this had happened because I had discovered his fraud and had taken definitive legal action. That afternoon, I received a call from James with news that quickened my pulse. "Alan, I have important information. David tried to access his main City Trust account this morning using the mobile app. The system showed him a message. Account temporarily restricted by court order. Did he try to contact the bank? Yes, but it's Sunday and the offices are closed. He could only speak with basic customer service, which isn't authorized to provide details about court orders. Do you know where he is now? According to our contacts, he spent the night at the Villamagna Hotel, apparently. He couldn't return to his apartment because the owner changed the locks this morning. The image of David sleeping in a luxury hotel, unaware that tomorrow he would wake up in a completely different world, gave me a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. For 42 years, he had been my son. Now he had become a con man who had stolen from his own dead mother. Monday, April 28th, would be the day David finally understood the consequences of underestimating his father. And I would be ready for every one of his desperate calls, every one of his attempts at manipulation, every one of his pleas for forgiveness. Justice moved slowly, but with a relentless precision that Emily would have admired. And the best part was, David still had no idea that the war had begun, and that he was already losing it. On Monday, April 28th, at 9 in the morning sharp, I arrived at Patrick Sims's notary office in the City Park District. I brought all the necessary documents to make the most drastic changes a father can make, completely removing his son from his financial and patrimonial legacy. Patrick received me in his office with the solemnity the occasion merited. He was a 63-year-old man who had handled my family's legal affairs for over 2 decades. He had drafted Emily's will, certified the purchase of our house, and witnessed all the important moments of our lives. "Alan, I've reviewed the documentation you sent me about the situation with David," he said, organizing the papers on his mahogany desk. "I must confess, in 40 years of practice, I have rarely seen a case of family betrayal so calculated and cruel. Patrick, I need you to understand that I'm not making this decision out of revenge, but out of principle. A man capable of forging his dead mother's signature to steal her inheritance doesn't deserve a single dollar of my estate." Patrick nodded gravely. "I perfectly understand your motivations. Let's proceed with the testamentary changes." The process was meticulous and exhaustive, First, we reviewed my current will line by line, identifying every mention of David as a beneficiary. It was disheartening to see how many times I had included special provisions to ensure his future well-being. Here is the main clause, Patrick pointed out. I name as my sole and universal heir to all my assets, rights, and actions my son, David Miller, with the hope that he will honor his mother's memory and continue the family values we have cultivated for generations. Those words, written just 4 years ago with so much paternal love, now sounded like a cruel joke of fate. I want that clause completely removed and replaced, I told Patrick. Instead, I want to establish a charitable legacy that truly honors Emily's memory. Over the next 2 hours, we drafted an entirely new will. My complete estate, valued at approximately $3.2 million, would be divided among 3 charitable organizations Emily had supported during her life: the American Heart Association, Chicago Charities, and the American Cancer Society. I also want to include a specific clause about David, I explained to Patrick as he transcribed my instructions. I want it expressly stated that David Miller is excluded from any testamentary benefit due to judicially proven fraudulent acts against the family estate. Alan, that is a very strong clause. Once included, it will be practically impossible for David to legally contest the will. Exactly what I'm looking for. While Patrick prepared the final documentation, I took care of the second phase of my plan, modifying my life insurance policies. I contacted my insurance company, State Life Insurance, where I had maintained a policy worth $900,000 for the last 20 years. My policy manager, Amanda Jenkins, had handled my account from the beginning and knew my family situation perfectly. Mr. Miller. Changing the beneficiary of such a substantial policy requires specific documentation, she explained, when I informed her of my intentions. Are you completely sure you want to remove your son as the sole beneficiary? Amanda. I am more certain of this than any other decision I have ever made. I want the beneficiary to be the Emily Miller Foundation for Cancer Research. A foundation named after your wife? A foundation I will establish this week, precisely to channel these resources into the fight against the disease that took Emily. It is the most appropriate way to honor her memory. The beneficiary change process was completed in 40 minutes. David had gone from being the recipient of $900,000 upon my death to receiving absolutely nothing. And the best part was, he had no way of knowing until it was too late to reverse it. At 2 p.m., I went to the bank to modify my company pension plan. Over 40 years of work, I had accumulated a pension fund valued at $600,000. Money that was originally intended to supplement David's inheritance. The financial advisor, Thomas Bell, reviewed all the available options with me for changing the destination of those funds. Mr. Miller, you can designate new beneficiaries, but you also have the option to convert the plan into a life annuity that expires upon your death, he explained. This way, no one can claim those funds after you pass. The second option sounds perfect. I don't want a single dollar of my work over 4 decades to end up in the hands of someone who doesn't deserve it. As we completed the paperwork, I received the first sign that David was beginning to realize his situation. My phone vibrated with a text message that sent a chill down my spine. Dad, something weird is happening with my bank accounts. Can we talk? I didn't respond immediately. I had waited for this moment for days, and I wanted David to experience the full anxiety of not understanding what was happening. After what he had done to me, he deserved to feel at least a fraction of the anguish I had lived through upon discovering his betrayal. At 4 p.m, I completed the last major change of my plan, the modification of the powers of attorney. For years, David had held limited power to act on my behalf in certain financial matters. A precaution Emily and I had taken, thinking of my old age. Back at Patrick's notary office, we formally revoked all powers David had held over my affairs. More importantly, we established new powers in favor of James Bryant, my lawyer, who would have complete authority to handle my affairs if I ever became incapacitated. David no longer has any legal authority over your estate. Patrick confirmed after completing all the documentation. If he tried to use any previous document, he would be committing another crime of usurpation. When I left the notary office at sunset, I carried copies of all the documents that had just radically changed David's financial future in the span of 8 hours. I had completely eliminated him from my will, my life insurance, my pension plan, and any legal authority over my decisions. My phone had received 6 more messages from David during the afternoon, each more urgent than the last. Dad, I need to talk to you urgently. The bank told me there are problems with my account. Do you know anything? Dad, please answer. Something very serious is happening. Why aren't you answering? I'm worried. Dad, they canceled my credit cards and I don't understand why. Please, call me. I need your help. That progression of messages showed me exactly what I had expected. David was beginning to understand that his world of luxury was collapsing, but he still hadn't connected the events to his own criminal actions. That night, as I ate dinner alone in the kitchen where Emily used to prepare her culinary specialties, I reflected on what I had achieved. In less than a week, I had built a solid legal case against David, recovered control of the stolen funds, eliminated his access to all financial resources, and completely rewritten my legacy to exclude him from any future benefit. But I knew the hardest part was yet to come. Soon, David would understand that I had discovered his fraud, and I would have to face the most painful conversation of my life, explaining to my son that he had irrevocably destroyed our relationship, and that he would have to live with the consequences of having betrayed his mother's memory. The phone rang again at 9 p.m. This time, I decided to answer. It was time for David to begin understanding the magnitude of what he had done and the consequences he would have to face. The silent phase of my response was over. Now, the direct confrontation began. Hello? I answered the phone with a calm that deliberately contrasted with the urgency I had detected in David's messages all day. Dad, thank God you answered. David's voice sounded agitated, almost desperate. I need you to explain what's happening. Something very strange is going on with all my accounts. Something strange? Explain exactly what kind of problems you're experiencing. David. Well, this morning I tried to pay for breakfast at the hotel and my card was declined. I thought it was a system error, but then I tried the other 3 cards and they were all declined too. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for David to feel the discomfort. And what else happened? I went to the bank and they told me my main account is, what did they say? Temporarily restricted by court order. Do you know anything about this? Because frankly, Dad, I'm starting to think someone is trying to harm me. The irony of his words hit me like a slap. David, who had forged documents to steal his dead mother's inheritance, now believed he was the victim of a conspiracy against him. David, have you considered the possibility that these problems are related to something you've done? Something I've done? Dad, I don't understand what you're talking about. I haven't done anything wrong. I've been completely transparent with you about Mom's inheritance. Completely transparent? My voice took on a colder tone. Are you sure about that? I could hear David breathing more heavily on the other end of the line. His confidence was beginning to crack, though he still didn't fully understand why. Dad, I don't know what you're implying, but I need your help right now. I don't have access to my money. They kicked me out of the apartment because, apparently, there are problems with the payments, and my car is impounded in the parking garage. It's like someone decided to ruin my life overnight, and you have no idea who could be behind all this? No, that's why I'm calling you. I thought maybe you had similar problems, or that you knew someone who could help me resolve this situation. David's naivety was astounding. After months of lavishly spending the stolen money, humiliating me publicly, wishing me to starve to death, he genuinely believed I would run to rescue him when his crimes finally had consequences. David, before I can help you, I need you to clarify something very important. Are you completely sure that all the documents related to your mother's inheritance are authentic and legitimate? The silence stretched for almost 20 seconds. I could imagine David on the other end, probably sitting in some hotel lobby, beginning to understand that his father knew more than he had shown. Dad, Of course they're authentic. Why are you asking me that? Because, my son, I've had time to very carefully review all the original documents that Emily and I kept in our safe. Another silence. Longer this time. When David spoke again, his voice had changed completely. The previous desperation had been replaced by something resembling controlled panic. I don't understand what you mean by that. I think you understand perfectly what I mean. The question is whether you have the honesty to admit it, or if you're going to continue this farce until the end. Dad, you're talking in riddles and I don't understand you. If you have something to say to me, say it clearly. The residual arrogance in his voice confirmed that David still believed he could manipulate the situation. Even facing the evidence that I knew the truth, he was still trying to maintain his version of events. All right, David, I'll tell you with total clarity. I took a deep breath before speaking the words that would change our relationship forever. I know you forged your mother's signature on the will. I know you invented a document dated after her death. And I know you stole $4.7 million that legally belonged to me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear David's irregular breathing, probably as his mind processed that his plan had been completely discovered. That's a very serious accusation. Dad, it's not an accusation. David, it's a fact, proven by professional handwriting analysis and backed by a court order. The problems you're experiencing aren't coincidences or bank errors. They are the direct legal consequences of your crimes. My crimes? David's voice went up an octave. Are you crazy? I haven't committed any crimes. Mom's will is completely legitimate. The will you showed me is dated December 5th, 2023. Your mother died on November 14th, 2023. How do you explain that date difference? This time, the silence stretched so long I thought he had hung up. When he finally spoke, David had adopted a completely different, aggressive, threatening tone. Look, Dad, I don't know what game you're playing, but this has gone too far. Maybe I made a small mistake with the dates, but that doesn't change the fundamental fact. Mom wanted me to inherit her money. A small mistake? David? Forging a testamentary document is a serious crime that carries years in prison. Prison? His voice cracked slightly. Dad, this is ridiculous. I'm your son. You're not going to send me to prison over a family misunderstanding. You are no longer my son. The words left my mouth with a coldness that surprised even me. My son would have respected his mother's memory. My son would never have stolen money from her grave. My son would not have wished me to starve to death after committing those crimes. This is crazy. You're completely insane. What's insane, David, is believing you could get away with stealing from me and humiliating me without consequences. What's insane is thinking your mother would be proud to see you spending her money in casinos and on luxuries, while wishing her husband would starve to death. I didn't. I never said that. No? You don't remember telling me, I hope you starve to death. Penniless. You miserable old man. Because I remember every word of that conversation. David began to hyperventilate audibly. Dad, please, listen to me. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I made impulsive decisions. But you can help me fix this. We can return the money. We can. There is no we in this situation. David, the money has already been recovered by court order. Your accounts are frozen because they contained funds of fraudulent origin. Your apartment lease was canceled because the rent was paid with stolen money. Your car was impounded for the same reason. You did all this. I presented the evidence before a court of law. The legal system did the rest. You're my father. You're supposed to protect me, not destroy me. The hypocrisy of his words filled me with an anger I had been holding back for weeks. Protect you? Like you protected your mother's memory when you forged her signature? Like you protected me when you wished for my death after stealing from me? Dad, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I'm your only son. You can't do this. I can, and I have. And there's something else you need to know. I paused, preparing for the final blow of this conversation. I have also completely removed you from my will, from my life insurance, and from my pension plan. When I die, You will not receive a single dollar of my estate." The scream David let out was primitive, animal. It was the sound of a man who finally understood he had lost everything due to his own greed and cruelty. "You can't do that. I'm your son. I have rights. You had rights. You lost them when you decided to betray your dead and living family." The call ended abruptly when David hung up, probably unable to process the magnitude of the consequences he faced. But I knew this was only the beginning. His world was collapsing, and the next few hours would show him exactly how much power he had lost by underestimating his father. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of desperate calls that documented the complete disintegration of the artificial world David had built with his mother's stolen money. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. on Tuesday, April 29th, and wouldn't stop obsessively for hours. "Dad, please, reconsider," David pleaded in the first call of the day. His voice was hoarse, as if he had spent the night crying. "You can't destroy your only son's life over a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding. David, there are forged documents and stolen money. There is a son who wished his father dead after committing those crimes. I'm on the street. Do you understand? They kicked me out of the hotel because my credit card was declined. I slept on a bench in the city park. The image of David, who just a week earlier had posted photos dining at $500 per person restaurants, sleeping outdoors, should have caused me paternal compassion. Instead, I felt only a cold satisfaction that justice was finally manifesting. You should have considered those consequences before forging your dead mother's signature. The second call came at 8 a.m. This time, David had adopted a different strategy: intimidation. "Dad, I've hired a lawyer. He told me what you've done is illegal. You can't freeze the accounts of a legitimate inheritance without a full judicial process." "Oh, really? And how did you pay this lawyer if all your accounts are frozen?" A telling silence followed my question. David clearly hadn't thought of that logical contradiction. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're going to face legal consequences for this. David, the only one who is going to face legal consequences is you. For document forgery, aggravated fraud, and inheritance theft. My lawyer estimates between 3 and 6 years in prison. The third call, at 10 a.m., revealed that David had started contacting other relatives, looking for support or, more likely, borrowed money. "I spoke to Uncle Raymond," he said, referring to Emily's younger brother. "I told him the whole situation and he's willing to help me financially until we resolve this problem." "Did you tell him you forged his dead sister's signature to steal her inheritance?" I explained there was a misunderstanding with some documents, and that you are overreacting due to grief. David's manipulation knew no bounds. Even in his desperation, he was still trying to control the narrative, painting me as an old man confused by pain, rather than the betrayed father I truly was. "David, Raymond already knows the truth. I sent him copies of all the forensic evidence last night." Another silence. Then an explosion of anger that revealed my son's true personality. "You are a son of a bitch. How can you do this to your own blood? Mom would be ashamed of you. Your mother would be ashamed of the thief you became." The fourth call came at noon, and this time David sounded completely desperate. "Dad, I haven't eaten since yesterday. I don't have a single dollar in cash. Please, just give me some money to survive while we sort this out. Where are the $800,000 you spent on cryptocurrency? Where are the $500,000 you lost in casinos? Where is the money you squandered on luxuries while planning my starvation?" That was different. It was my money. It was your dead mother's money, which you stole by forging her signature. The calls became more frequent during the afternoon. At 2, at 3, at 4, each one more desperate than the last. Each one revealing more clearly the manipulative personality David had been hiding for years. In the 5 p.m. call, he changed his strategy again, trying to appeal to Emily's memory. "Dad, Mom wouldn't have wanted this. She would have wanted us to be a united family, especially after her death. Your mother also wouldn't have wanted you to forge her signature to steal from me. But that didn't stop you. Mom loved me. She understood I was more capable of handling the money than you. If she loved you so much, Why does the real will exclude you completely until after my death? The sixth call of the afternoon was interrupted by an event that dramatically accelerated the situation. David was contacted by the police for an official interrogation about the document forgery charges. Dad. 2 police officers came looking for me. They told me I have to report to the station tomorrow to give a statement on criminal charges. Did you do this? I presented the evidence to the court. The district attorney's office decided to press charges based on the evidence. You can't send your own son to jail. I'm not sending you to jail, David. Your own criminal actions are what have legal consequences. The 7th call, at 8 p.m., was the most pathetic of all. David had begun to cry uncontrollably. Dad, I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong. I know I made terrible decisions. But I'm your son. Your only son. You can't abandon me like this. For the first time in days, I felt a pang of paternal pain. Hearing David cry reminded me of the boy I had comforted during nightmares, the teenager I had hugged after romantic disappointments. But then I remembered the words he had said to me just weeks ago. I hope you starve to death. Penniless. You miserable old man. David, you had the chance to be my son. You lost it when you decided to rob your dead mother and wish for my death. I never wanted you to die. I was angry. I was confused. People say terrible things when they're upset. Decent people don't wish death upon their parents, no matter how upset they are. The calls continued all night. At 10, at 11, at midnight, at 1 in the morning. Each call more hysterical than the last. Each documenting the complete psychological disintegration of a man who finally understood he had lost everything to his own greed. Sometime during the early morning, I started counting the calls. By 6 a.m. on Wednesday, April 30th, David had called me exactly 247 times in 24 hours. 247 pleas for forgiveness from a man who had gone from being a stolen money millionaire to a homeless person in less than a week. The last call of that marathon of desperation came at 6:15 a.m. David sounded completely defeated, his voice barely a whisper. Dad, I can't anymore. I have no strength left to fight. You've won. This was never about winning or losing, David. It was about justice and consequences. What's going to happen to me now? You are going to face the legal consequences of your crimes. You are going to learn to live without the money you stole. And you are going to find out if you are capable of becoming the man your mother would have wanted you to be, or if you will continue to be the thief you became. Is there any chance that one day you could forgive me? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. For 42 years, I had loved this man unconditionally. But the man who had forged his dead mother's signature, stolen her inheritance, wished for my death, was no longer my son. David, forgiveness is earned with actions, not words. And your actions have shown who you really are. When I hung up that call, I knew the most intense phase of my confrontation with David was over. The next few hours would show him if he was capable of learning from the consequences of his actions, or if he would continue down the path of self-destruction he had chosen by betraying his family. 247 calls for forgiveness couldn't erase the cruel words he had spoken, nor the crimes he had committed. But maybe they could be the beginning of a genuine transformation that honored Emily's memory. Only time would tell. On Thursday, May 1st, at 3 in the afternoon, as I was reading the newspaper in the living room where Emily used to cross-stitch, I heard my doorbell ring insistently. I wasn't expecting visitors, and after David's 247 calls in the last 48 hours, I had a pretty clear suspicion who might be at my door. When I opened it, I found my son in a state I had never imagined seeing. David, who had always been meticulous about his personal appearance, was disheveled, unshaven, wearing the same wrinkled clothes he had probably been in for days. His eyes were swollen and red, clear evidence of hours of crying and lack of sleep. "Dad," he murmured, his voice broken, to a dramatic contrast to the arrogance he had shown just a week ago. "Please, let me in. We need to talk." I watched him for several seconds without moving from the doorway. This broken man, standing on my doorstep, was technically my son. But the David I had known for 42 years had died for me the day he forged his mother's signature. If you want to talk, you can do it from there, I replied coldly. You are not coming into the house you tried to steal from me. Dad, please. I know I made terrible mistakes. I know I let you down in the worst way possible. But I came here to confess everything, to explain exactly what I did and why. Now you want to confess? After the forensic evidence proved your guilt? After you lost all access to the stolen money? David literally collapsed, falling to his knees on my doorstep. I had never seen a grown man break so completely, and a primitive part of my paternal brain felt the urge to comfort him. But the image of Emily on her deathbed, trusting me to protect her memory, kept me firm. Dad, you're right about everything. I forged Mom's signature. I invented a fake will. I stole the money that legally belonged to you. Everything you discovered is true. His words, though expected, hit me with an unexpected emotional force. It was one thing to know intellectually that David had committed these crimes. It was another, very different thing to hear him admit it with total clarity. And why did you do it? Explain to me how a 42-year-old man decides to rob his dead mother. David looked up, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Genuine shame mixed with total desperation. I had debts. Dad. Gambling debts I didn't tell you about. I had been gambling for years, losing money I didn't have. When Mom died, I owed almost $200,000 to very dangerous people. Dangerous people? Loan sharks. People who don't accept excuses or payment plans. They told me if I didn't pay by Christmas, they were going to. They were going to hurt me badly. This revelation added a completely new dimension to David's betrayal. He hadn't just stolen out of greed. He had risked the family assets to save his own skin from the consequences of a gambling addiction he had hidden for years. So, you decided to rob your mother to pay your casino debts. At first, I thought I could get a loan using the inheritance as collateral, just temporarily. But when I reviewed Mom's real will and saw that she left everything to you, I panicked. And you decided to forge it. I met someone who specializes in documents. It cost me $20,000 to create the fake will with Mom's signature. I thought it would be easy, that you were so affected by her death. You wouldn't check the details carefully. The calculated coldness of his plan disgusted me. He had used my grief over losing Emily as an opportunity to steal from me, counting on my vulnerable emotional state to protect him from scrutiny. And the rest of the money? The millions you squandered on luxuries and casinos after you stole? He lowered his head, unable to maintain eye contact. After paying my initial debts, there were over $4 million left, and for the first time in years, I felt free, debt-free, with money in the bank. I started spending because I could. The apartment, the car, the expensive dinners. It was like a drug. And the $800,000 in cryptocurrency? I thought I could multiply the money quickly. I had seen videos on YouTube of people getting rich trading Bitcoin. I lost almost all of it in a week. And the $500,000 you lost in casinos? After the crypto losses, I panicked. I thought I could win the money back by betting big on roulette and blackjack. Every loss made me bet more, trying to win back the last one. The stupidity of his financial decisions was astounding. But what outraged me most was the total lack of respect for the origin of the money. Every squandered dollar was an additional insult to Emily's memory. And when you decided to wish me to starve to death, was that also part of your panic? David covered his face with his hands and began to sob uncontrollably. Those words. My God, I can't believe I said that to you. I was desperate. I knew you had started to suspect, and I thought if I intimidated you enough, you would stop asking questions. You wished me dead. David, your own father, who had loved you unconditionally for 42 years. I know, and I am more ashamed of those words than anything else I've done. I would rather have stolen from 10 strangers than have said something so cruel to you. His tears seemed genuine, But the magnitude of his betrayal had created a chasm between us that I wasn't sure could ever be crossed. David, do you understand that what you did wasn't just stealing money from me? You desecrated your mother's memory. You forged her signature after her death. You used her grave as a business opportunity. Yes, yes, I understand that. And I understand that you can probably never forgive me. What do you expect from this conversation? That I forgive you and restore your access to the money? That I drop the criminal charges? David wiped his tears and looked at me directly for the first time since he had arrived. I don't expect anything from you, Dad. I came here because I needed you to know the whole truth, not just the facts you discovered through the legal investigation. I needed you to understand that. Although my actions were unforgivable, I never stopped loving you as a father. Did you love me when you forged my dead wife's signature? No. In those moments, fear and desperation had replaced everything else, including my love for you and my respect for Mom. And now that you've lost everything, the love has conveniently returned. The love never left completely. Dad, it was buried under layers of panic, greed, and stupidity. But being on the street these last few days, having nothing, facing the real possibility of prison, has made me remember what really matters. I remained silent for several minutes, observing this broken man, who was technically still my biological son, but who had become a stranger through his own decisions. David, what are you going to do now? How do you plan to live without the money you stole? I don't know, he admitted honestly. I guess I'll have to get a job. Something I haven't done in years because I always had access to your money or the stolen money. I'll have to learn to live like a normal person. And the criminal consequences? My public defender says that with the evidence you presented, I'll probably face between 2 and 4 years in prison. He says if I cooperate fully and show genuine remorse, I might get a suspended sentence. The reality that my son might go to prison for his crimes against our family finally materialized completely in my mind. It was what I had sought with my lawsuit, but hearing it expressed so clearly produced a complex mixture of righteous satisfaction and paternal pain. David, I said finally, I want you to understand something very clearly. The money is no longer yours. It has been returned to the legitimate estate, and the authorities are tracing every dollar to ensure full recovery. There is no going back on that, I understand. I also want you to understand that, although I appreciate your confession, it doesn't change the consequences of your actions. You have destroyed our father-son relationship in a way that may be irreparable. David nodded slowly, fresh tears running down his cheeks. I understand, Dad. I just hope that someday, maybe years in the future, you can find a way to forgive me enough to let me try to be the son I should have always been. When I closed the door after that conversation, I knew the time had come to make the final decision about the future of my relationship with David. That night, after David left my doorstep, a completely destroyed man, I sat in Emily's study with a cup of chamomile tea, which she used to prepare when we needed to make important decisions. The photographs of our life together watched me from the shelves, constantly reminding me that all my actions must honor her memory and the values we had shared for 45 years, for hours. I reflected on David's confession. His full admission of guilt, though late, had revealed aspects of his personality I had never suspected. The gambling addiction, the debts to dangerous loan sharks, the cold planning of his theft, all painted a portrait of a man who had lived a double life for years. Friday, May 2nd, dawned gray and rainy, as if the sky reflected the emotional state I was in. At 9 a.m., I received a call from James with news that would definitively speed up the legal process. Alan, I have important updates on David's case, he said, in a more serious tone than usual. The district attorney's office has decided to fast-track the case, due to the confession David made to the police yesterday. Confession to the police? He was at my house yesterday confessing to me. But he didn't mention talking to the authorities. Apparently, after visiting you, he voluntarily went to the station and repeated the same full confession he gave you. He admitted the document forgery, the inheritance theft, everything. This information genuinely surprised me. After our meeting, David had taken the initiative to officially confess his crimes, something he could have avoided doing if he had just hired a good defense lawyer. What does this mean for the judicial process? It means the case will be resolved much more quickly, with a full confession and solid forensic evidence. The DA is willing to negotiate a sentence. David could face 18 months of suspended prison time and 5 years of probation, plus the obligation to return all the money. But the money has already been recovered through the judicial seizure. Correct, but David would have to pay an additional fine equivalent to 20% of the stolen amount as a penalty. In this case, around $1 million. $1 million? How is he going to pay that amount if he has no resources? He will have to work and allocate a portion of his income for years to pay off that debt to the state. It's part of the judicial system's rehabilitation. That afternoon, as I organized all the documents related to the recovery of Emily's estate, I received an unexpected visit. Raymond Hill, Emily's younger brother, knocked on my door with a grave expression I recognized immediately. "Alan," he said after I invited him in, "we need to talk about David, and about what's going to happen to him now." Raymond was 61 and had been very close to Emily his entire life. As a retired school teacher, he had always had a balanced perspective on family matters, and his opinion had influenced many important decisions Emily and I had made over the years. "What's on your mind?" "Raymond, I've been reflecting on this whole situation since you sent me the documentation about what David did, as Emily's brother. I am absolutely outraged by the desecration of her memory. But as David's uncle, I am also worried about what will happen to him. David will have to face the consequences of his actions. It's what Emily would have wanted. I agree with you completely. But I also believe Emily would have wanted us to give him a chance to redeem himself, as long as it was genuine and required real sacrifice on his part." Raymond's words hit me deeply, because they reflected exactly the kind of moral dilemma Emily and I used to discuss. She had always believed in second chances, but only for people who demonstrated authentic change through actions, not just words. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm not proposing you give him back the money or drop the criminal charges. I am proposing that, after he serves his sentence and demonstrates real change for at least 2 years, you consider the possibility of re-establishing a minimal relationship with him. Raymond, David forged your dead sister's signature, stole millions from me, and wished me to starve to death. I know, and those actions are unforgivable. But I also know that Emily loved David deeply, and she would be devastated if she knew his criminal actions resulted in the permanent destruction of her family." We spent the next 2 hours discussing all aspects of the situation. Raymond did not defend David's actions, nor did he minimize the seriousness of his crimes. But he did argue that full punishment and possible rehabilitation should open the door to an eventual, limited reconciliation. On Saturday, May 3rd, I received a call that would change my perspective on the possibilities of David's redemption. The director of a rehabilitation center for gambling addicts on the outskirts of Chicago called me, "Mr. Miller. My name is Charles Vaughn, director of the Summit Recovery Center. Your son David presented himself here voluntarily yesterday, requesting admission to our residential rehabilitation program." "Residential program?" "Yes. It's an intensive 6-month treatment for people with severe gambling addiction." David explained his entire legal and financial situation to us, and specifically requested the most rigorous program we offer, and how can he pay for that treatment if he has no resources. That is precisely the reason for my call. David asked us to contact you, to ask if you would be willing to cover the cost of the treatment. It's $12,000 for the complete program. This request placed me in an extraordinarily complex position. David was indirectly asking me to finance his rehabilitation, which could be interpreted as further manipulation to get money from me. But it could also be genuine evidence that he recognized his problem and wanted to fix it before it completely destroyed his life. "Mr. Vaughn, I need to think about this request. Can you give me some details about what exactly this program includes?" "Of course. It's a residential program where patients live at our facility for 6 months. It includes daily individual therapy, group therapy, financial education, job rehabilitation, and psychiatric follow-up. It also includes family therapy to rebuild relationships damaged by the addiction. Family therapy? Yes. We work with family members who have been affected by the addict's actions. In David's case, he specifically mentioned he wanted to include sessions where he could work on repairing the damage he had caused you. That night, as I walked through the garden where Emily grew her roses, I found myself facing the most difficult decision of this entire process. Should I give David the chance to prove his repentance was genuine by funding his rehab? Or would this be just another form of manipulation, a way to get money from me using guilt and hope as tools? On Sunday, May 4th, after an almost sleepless night, I made a decision that would define the future course of my relationship with David. I called the recovery center and spoke directly with Charles Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn, I am willing to finance David's treatment under certain very specific conditions. What conditions? Mr. Miller, first condition. David must complete the entire 6-month program without leaving voluntarily if he leaves before finishing. He will never receive any further help from me. I understand. Second condition. During those 6 months, David cannot contact me directly or indirectly. No calls, no letters, no messages through third parties. I want his rehabilitation to be completely independent of any hope of reconciliation with me. That is a very strict condition. Third condition. At the end of the program, you will provide me with a complete report on his progress, his genuine commitment to change, and his real probability of successful rehabilitation. Only then will I consider the possibility of very limited communication. And if he successfully completes the program, if he demonstrates genuine change for 6 months without contact with me, and if your professional evaluation suggests real rehabilitation, I will consider allowing a single conversation to determine if any basis exists for a very limited future relationship. Mr. Miller, these are very challenging conditions, but I believe they might be exactly what David needs to prove his repentance is authentic. When I hung up that call, I knew I had made a decision Emily would have approved of. I wasn't giving David a free second chance. I was giving him the opportunity to earn a second chance through hard work, personal sacrifice, and demonstrable change. If he failed, he would confirm he was incorrigibly manipulative, and he would lose any possibility of future reconciliation. If he succeeded, he would open the door to a very limited and conditional relationship that honored both justice and compassion. The fate of our father-son relationship was now entirely in David's hands. The next 18 months passed in absolute silence between David and me, just as I had stipulated in the conditions for funding his rehabilitation. During that period, my life adopted a completely different routine, marked by the definitive absence of both Emily and David, the two people who had defined my existence for decades. In July 2024, I received the official notification that David had been sentenced to 18 months of suspended prison time and 5 years of probation, exactly as James had predicted. The sentence included the obligation to pay the $1 million fine to the state, which would be deducted from his future work income over the next 15 years. During those months of silence, I established routines that helped me rebuild my identity as an independent man. I started taking painting classes on Tuesday mornings, something Emily had always wanted me to try. I joined a book club on Thursday afternoons, where we discussed classic American novels. On Saturday mornings, I volunteered at a soup kitchen run by Chicago Charities. In September, I received monthly reports from the Recovery Center on David's progress. As we had agreed, Charles Vaughn sent me professional summaries that documented my son's evolution without revealing personal details that could lead to emotional manipulation. September 2024. The patient has completed his first month without incident. He actively participates in individual and group therapies. He has begun courses in financial education and impulse control. October 2024. The patient shows significant progress in recognizing destructive patterns. He has started community work within the center, No attempts at unauthorized outside contact. November 2024. The patient has completed certification in basic carpentry as part of job rehabilitation. He continues to demonstrate genuine commitment to the process. Psychological evaluations show a significant reduction in compulsive behaviors. In February 2025, exactly 1 year after this whole nightmare began, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable months ago. I officially established the Emily Miller Foundation for Pancreatic Cancer Research. I allocated $2 million of my personal estate to this foundation, making it one of the most important private organizations in the country dedicated specifically to the disease that had taken Emily. The foundation would fund medical research, provide support to affected families, and keep Emily's memory alive in a way she would have fully approved. During the opening ceremony, held at the hospital where Emily had received treatment, I spoke publicly about my motivation for establishing the foundation. My wife, Emily Miller, fought pancreatic cancer with a dignity and courage that inspired me during her final months. This foundation represents her true legacy, the hope that no other family will have to face this disease without the necessary resources to fight. I didn't mention David during my speech, but his physical and emotional absence was present in every word I spoke. The foundation was my way of honoring Emily, using resources he had tried to steal for completely opposite purposes. In April 2025, I received the most significant report from the Recovery Center. April 2025. The patient has successfully completed 8 months of the program. He has obtained professional certification in carpentry and electrical work. He has started paid work within the center, allocating 50% of his income to the state fine fund. Psychiatric evaluations confirm a complete absence of compulsive gambling behaviors. We recommend consideration for the final phase of the program. In May, 2 days before the anniversary of my initial confrontation with David, I received a call from Charles Vaughn that I had been anticipating for months. Mr. Miller, David has officially completed the 6-month residential program. He has met all requirements and has demonstrated genuine, sustainable transformation. What is your professional assessment of the likelihood he will maintain these changes? In my 20 years directing this center, David is among the top 5% of patients who show the most profound and authentic change. His commitment has not wavered for 6 months. He has developed real job skills and has worked extensively on issues of family responsibility. Has he mentioned expectations about reconciliation with me? That is one of the most impressive things about his process. He has never expressed expectations of forgiveness or reconciliation. He has worked on his rehabilitation with the clear understanding that it might not result in the restoration of his family relationship. What do you recommend as the next step? I recommend that you consider the single conversation you mentioned in your original conditions. David has earned the right to that opportunity, but the decision about any future relationship remains completely yours. That night, as I ate dinner alone in the kitchen where Emily used to experiment with Mediterranean recipes, I reflected on the extraordinary changes that had occurred in my life over the last 18 months. I had gone from being a vulnerable widower, robbed by his own son, to becoming an independent man who had reclaimed his dignity, established a significant legacy for his wife, and forced real consequences for family betrayal. David, according to all professional reports, had gone from being a manipulative addict who forged documents and wished his father dead, to becoming a man who worked honestly, to paid his debts, and had accepted the possibility of living without family reconciliation. On Thursday, May 15th, 2025, exactly 1 year after David began his rehabilitation, I made the decision to honor my original commitment. I called Charles Vaughn and agreed to a supervised meeting at the Recovery Center. It will be a 2-hour maximum conversation. I specified. David can say what he needs to say, and I will determine if there is any basis for very limited future contact. I understand perfectly. Mr. Miller, are there any specific conditions for this meeting? Yes. I want David to clearly understand that this conversation guarantees nothing. It does not imply automatic forgiveness. It does not restore any financial rights, and it does not promise any kind of future relationship. It is simply an opportunity for him to demonstrate if his transformation is authentic. I will explain it to him in exactly those words. When I hung up that call, I knew I was heading toward the most important and difficult conversation of my life. For 18 months, I had lived without David. I had built a new identity, honored Emily's memory, and found purpose in helping other families affected by cancer. The question now was whether David had used those same 18 months to genuinely become the man his mother would have wanted him to be, or if he had simply learned to manipulate the system better to get this opportunity. In 3 days, I would finally have the answer, on Monday, May 18th, 2025, at 10 a.m. sharp. I arrived at the Summit Recovery Center for the conversation that would determine if David had experienced a genuine transformation, or if he had simply perfected his manipulative skills over 18 months of forced rehabilitation. Charles Vaughn received me in his office with the seriousness the occasion merited. Over the last few months, we had developed a professional relationship based on clinical reports and objective evaluations. But this would be the first time I would directly see the results of his work with David, Mr. Miller, before the conversation begins. I want you to know that David has been thoroughly informed about the conditions of this meeting. He understands he has no guarantees, that you have promised nothing, and that this might be the only opportunity he has to communicate with you. How did he react to those conditions? With complete acceptance. He told me he was simply grateful for the opportunity to show you he had changed, regardless of whether it resulted in any kind of future relationship. Charles walked me to a small conference room with windows overlooking the center's garden. The walls were decorated with certificates of program completion from former patients, tangible reminders that genuine rehabilitation was possible for people willing to work for it. When David entered the room, I needed several seconds to fully recognize him. The man who had been at my door 18 months ago, disheveled and desperate, had been replaced by someone who radiated a calm and dignity I hadn't seen in him for years. David had lost weight, but in a healthy way that suggested regular exercise and proper nutrition. His hair was well cut, he wore clean, modest work clothes, and his hands showed the calluses of someone who had been doing real physical labor. But the most impressive thing was his expression, serene, with no trace of the previous arrogance or the manipulative desperation he had shown during his collapse. "Dad," he said simply, without trying to approach for a hug or physical contact. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity." "David," I replied, also remaining formal and distant, "you have 2 hours to show me if your transformation is authentic or if you've just learned to act better." He sat across from me with his hands folded on the table, and for several minutes, we just observed each other in silence. It was as if we were evaluating each other after an absence that had fundamentally changed us both, Dad, during these 18 months. I've had time to reflect deeply on every terrible decision I made, every cruel word I spoke, and every way I betrayed everything you and Mom taught me for 42 years. Go on. I want to start with something that is more important than any apology. I want you to know exactly how I've used these 18 months to become a different man. David proceeded to tell me in detail about his rehabilitation experience, but not in the self-pitying way I had expected. Instead, he focused on the specific skills he had developed, the work he had done, and the concrete ways he had changed his thought patterns and behaviors. I work as a certified carpenter and electrician now. For the last 8 months, I've earned $1,200 a month doing repairs and construction. $600 goes directly to the state to pay the fine they imposed. The other $600 I use for basic living expenses. And where do you live? In a shared room in a residence for people in job rehabilitation. I pay $300 a month for rent, $200 for food, and $100 for transportation and basic expenses. What do you do with your free time? I attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week. I read books on financial management and addiction psychology. On weekends, I volunteer at a soup kitchen for the homeless. This description impressed me because it was completely different from the lifestyle David had led his entire adult life. For the first time, he was living within modest means, working with his hands, and contributing to his community in ways that didn't involve taking advantage of others. David, why did you decide to volunteer with the homeless? Because after spending nights sleeping in parks and train stations during my collapse, I understood what it means to be completely destitute. I wanted to help people in that situation, and constantly remind myself where self-destruction leads. And what have you learned about yourself during this process? David took a deep breath before answering, as if he had been preparing for this question for months. I've learned that for years. I had been living a complete lie about who I was and what I deserved. I grew up believing the family money would eventually be mine, so I never developed real skills or a genuine work ethic. When I faced a financial crisis, my first reaction was to steal rather than work. And now I understand that every dollar I earn working is worth more than all the millions I stole, because it comes from my own effort and legitimate contribution. For the first time in my life, I feel proud of how I generate my income. Over the next 2 hours, David demonstrated a level of self-reflection and behavioral change that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. He didn't try to minimize his crimes or excuse his past actions. Instead, he showed a complete understanding of how his decisions had affected not only me, but Emily's memory and the very concept of family trust. Dad, there's something specific I need to tell you about Mom. What? During therapy, I worked extensively on understanding how my actions desecrated her memory. Forging her signature wasn't just stealing from you. It was a violation of everything she represented. Mom valued honesty above all else, and I turned her death into an opportunity to commit the most dishonest act of my life. His words showed an understanding of the moral dimensions of his crimes that had been absent during all our previous conversations. And what have you done to honor her memory during your rehabilitation? Every month, I donate $50 of my salary to the Emily Miller Foundation that you established. It's all I can afford on my current budget, but I want to contribute in some way to preserving her legacy positively. This revelation surprised me completely. David had been following the Foundation's activities and had found a way to contribute without contacting me directly, respecting the conditions of our no communication agreement. David, what do you expect from this conversation? What kind of relationship do you think we could have in the future? I expect nothing. Dad, if after this conversation you decide you prefer to have no contact with me ever again, I will respect that completely. You have shown more patience and justice than I deserved by giving me this opportunity. But what would you ideally hope for? Ideally, I would like the possibility of very limited communication with you, perhaps once a year, not to restore a full father-son relationship. Because I understand that trust is broken forever, but so you can verify that I am continuing to live honorably at the end of the 2 hours. Charles Vaughn returned to end the meeting. David stood up, looked me directly in the eyes one last time, and said something that would stay with me for months. Dad, regardless of what you decide, I want you to know that these 18 months have taught me to be the man Mom would have wanted me to be if we never see each other again. At least I will die knowing that I finally honored her memory with my actions, instead of desecrating it. When I left the recovery center that afternoon, I knew I had witnessed a genuine transformation. David had demonstrated not only sincere repentance, but sustainable behavioral change and a positive contribution to society. 2 weeks later, I made a decision that Emily would have approved of. I sent a letter to David, allowing limited communication once every 6 months, subject to the condition that he maintained his rehabilitation and honest work. It wasn't complete forgiveness, nor the restoration of our father-son relationship. It was recognition that people can genuinely change, and that justice must include the possibility of redemption for those who truly earn it. Emily's money would forever remain in the foundation that bore her name, helping families affected by cancer. David would continue paying his debts to the state for the next 14 years, and I would continue to live independently, honoring Emily's memory through positive actions, rather than perpetual bitterness. We had found a way to coexist that respected both justice and compassion, exactly as Emily would have taught us. If she had been alive to guide us through this family crisis that almost destroyed us forever. If you like this story, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thanks for watching.